The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 22. Revealings and Relations. The headmaster's office at Hogwarts was warm and welcoming to the group as they entered. This was in spite of its lack of use these last few weeks, since Professor Dumbledore had been chased out by Umbridge for the illicit group calling themselves Dumbledore's Army. Snape let them in and went to the flue, sticking his head inside and speaking to someone for a moment. About a minute later, Professor Dumbledore, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin stepped through the grate. Ron, who had never met Sirius and had only heard bits of vague information about him from Harry, stood agape. "There's Sirius Black!" the ginger wizard said, eyes round, pointing at the long-haired man and poking Harry in the side. "Well spotted," Sirius said drolly. "Is this the boy that cared for Peter for so long, Remus?" "Afraid so, but let's not hold it against him, shall we? Mr. Weasley has been a good friend to Harry all these years." Lupin smiled. To the group he asked, "How are you all doing? Keeping up on your defense studies?" Dumbstruck, they all nodded, even Ron, who continued to look at Harry's godfather, agog. "Sirius is a wanted criminal? He's not supposed to be out in public. What's he doing here?" Ron rounded on Professor Snape. "You said you could tell us what's going on." Snape simply stared at Ron stonily. Hermione could understand Ron's confusion. They had thought until a moment ago that Sirius had been captured, and here he stood. Even she had to admit that seeing Sirius Black here in person, with Professor Snape, and the until a few moments ago exiled Professor Dumbledore, was all a shocking surprise, on top of the events of earlier that evening. But for Ron, Ginny, and Draco, nearly all of this was new information. Though their parents and two eldest brothers were involved in the Order, the youngest Weasleys had not been told anything about its work. As for Draco, his allegiance to the Order of the Phoenix was rather newly pledged, as it were. "Yes, they certainly have been working on their defensive skills. Isn't that right, Harry?" Professor Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. "Dumbledore's Army?" The four Gryffindors smiled guiltily. "Apologies about that again, Professor," Harry said. "Think nothing of it, Harry. I am rather proud of all of you," Dumbledore said. Draco looked away, knowing how his role in the inquisitorial squad must have looked to the stately headmaster. But when he chanced to glance back at the man, Dumbledore was smiling at him as well. He hesitantly returned it, with an uncertain smile of his own. 3 weeks earlier, Professor Umbridge had been tipped off about the underground group, and had been given Harry's name as the ringleader. She'd brought Harry to Dumbledore's office with the intent of expelling him, but Dumbledore had assumed full responsibility, then dramatically escaped. Only Hermione knew the identity of the tipster. Everyone else assumed that Marietta Edgecombe had simply come down with dragonpox or something, and had to leave school. "But this boy, he's a Malfoy," Sirius said suspiciously. "This is Lucius's son, is it not?" "He is also a Black. He's Narcissa's son, too, Sirius," Remus reminded him. "I've told you what Mouse has said about her." "Who? What? My mother?" Draco's mouth seemed to be trying to ask several questions at once. It was Hermione's turn to speak up. "I'm afraid we're all still a little lost. Is there any way that someone can explain?" she asked tiredly. An hour later, their heads filled with heretofore undiscovered information, the 5 of them left the office, descending the staircase in baffled silence. Draco's mind was reeling. Richard Granger was just an ordinary Muggle man, a tooth healer, caught up in Voldemort's web of insanity, because of his father's misunderstandings. The thing they'd been after tonight, the prophecy, said that only Potter had the power to kill Voldemort somehow. Dumbledore had been rather vague, only saying that he and Harry would discuss it in more detail later. Ronald Weasley had cared for one of Voldemort's right-hand men, who'd been disguised as a rat for several years. Oh, and his cousin Sirius was alive, innocent, and helping to bring down the Dark Lord, along with a whole host of others, including his girlfriend's father and possibly his own mother. "Your dad," Harry began, looking at Hermione. "The prophecy," Hermione answered weakly. "Scabbers," Weasley muttered, clutching his stomach and looking green. "Yeah, that was the best bit," Ginny said, with the barest hint of a smile. "Not sure about the rest of you, but I'm pretty sure there's a bottle of cinnamon rum in the Gryffindor common room with my name on it." With that, the red-haired witch turned towards the nearest staircase. After a moment, and a brief look of longing at the girl's retreating backside, Potter followed her. Hermione looked at Weasley sympathetically. "I'm sorry we didn't tell you. About Peter, I mean," started Hermione, but she was cut off by Weasley, who held up a hand. "I don't think I want to talk about it. I know I don't want to think about it. I don't even like cinnamon rum, but I'm going to see if Ginny wants to split the bottle." The ginger wizard followed the other two Gryffindors up the far staircase. "And then there were two," Hermione said, turning and smiling in commiseration at Draco. "You've been awfully quiet. What are you thinking about?" Without a word, Draco took her by the hand and pulled her down a different staircase, heading back to the entrance hall. They crossed the hall and took another corridor, finding the empty divination classroom used by Firenze. Draco closed and locked the door behind them. Stars twinkled overhead, barely peeping through the leaves of the magicked trees. The mossy turf felt soft and plush under them, and without any discussion they both removed their shoes and socks and flopped onto the ground. Draco let out a long, pent-up sigh and lay back on the ground, lacing his fingers together under his head. "My father. Your father. You know, the first time we met, Lucius told me he thought your father was a Death Eater. He had this whole thing built up in his head about it. At first I thought maybe he was right. I didn't know any better. Your father had a mark on his arm." "It's a tattoo? It's called the Caduceus symbol. It's a symbol to do with medicine. Dad was a medic in the military. I think he got it then," she explained. She lay down next to him, turning to face him, and propping her head on her hand. "Right," he said. "Father just kept insisting, kept saying that Richard was dangerous, that we needed to appease him and protect you." "Protect me from what?" "Muggle-borns typically aren't welcomed into the wizarding world. Certainly not by purebloods, Hermione." "Ah, yes. So in our first years, you weren't trying to be my friend. You were afraid of my father." "At first. But then—" He turned on his side, mirroring her pose. "But then?" she asked, blinking slowly at him. "Then—" Without him even being aware, his upper body began to lean in, moving closer to her. They nearly kissed when he abruptly pulled away. "Bloody hell, no!" "What's wrong?" she asked, panting slightly at the whiplash of the moment. "What if Father is right? You are adopted, after all." "Yes, and?" Draco rolled back and dropped his head back to the ground. No one in the meeting tonight had said it, likely to spare Hermione's feelings, but Draco knew Lucius's true thoughts on the matter. "Lucius thinks you're the Dark Lord's daughter," he said flatly. "What?" Hermione laughed. then abruptly stopped and raised one eyebrow perceptibly. "Wait, you've known that he thinks this for how long?"
"And you've known that my cousin, Sirius, is innocent for how long?" He smirked back at her.
"Fine, we've both kept things. But seriously, he thinks that Voldemort is my—"
"Please don't say that name," Draco said seriously. "But yes, and I've never really believed it, not truly, but I've never bothered to dispute it with him because—"
After a moment's silence, she prompted, "Because?"
"Because if that were the case, you would be pureblood, at least in my father's mind."
He sighed, closing his eyes. This might be the worst of it, in a way, revealing to her the amount of bigotry and vitriol that he had been raised with. Her brows knitted together in confusion. What does that even mean?
"Purebloods generally start planning betrothal contracts around 16 years old," he began, ignoring her look of dawning horror. "Because of my family's lineage, I would be expected to take a pureblood wife. Seeing as I just turned 16, ordinarily my father would begin negotiations around now to start a courtship. This time next year, or at most the year after, I would be expected to sign a betrothal contract with that is, my father and another father."
"Oh my God, Draco!" she breathed.
"But when he told me that you might be his, that is to say, I didn't believe it, not really. But if you were, or at least if he believed you were—"
"If he believed I was, then what?" she said haltingly.
"If he believed you were pureblood, we wouldn't have to break up. I could keep you with me. We could be together."
With a look of incredulous disbelief, she asked, "Married?"
"No, I mean not immediately. We could have a long betrothal. I've even heard of some lasting 10 years, though that's rare. But once you enter a contract, you're expected to remain faithful to it, emotionally, physically, and I—"
At this, he turned his head quickly to stare into her copper eyes with longing. "And you?" With difficulty, he broke the gaze.
"Doesn't matter," he said. "Something he said, I realized tonight at the ministry, who he thinks your mother is. Hermione, if he's right, Salazar, we'd be cousins."
"What?" Hermione began to laugh in spite of the seriousness of the situation. "What do you mean?"
"I believe he thinks Bellatrix is your mother."
"What?"
Draco looked hard at her, turning again on his side. "Hermione, if there's any chance that you are—"
"I'm not!" she burst out. "Draco, I met my father, my biological father, I mean, one time years ago at a function in Edinburgh. He's now a high-ranking officer in the British Army. He is entirely Muggle, I can assure you. As for my mother, well, she didn't want to have contact with me. It's a long story, but essentially she didn't want her husband finding out about my existence. But I've seen a photo of her, and I know her name. She's also a Muggle, living somewhere in Wales now, if I'm not mistaken."
He sucked in a hopeful breath. "So there's no chance we're actually related?"
"Not even a small one," she giggled.
"Oh, thank Merlin."
Draco breathed, scooting over the ground to her, closing the space between them for a longing kiss. Hermione's free arm came up to grab his arm and pull it towards her, as they lay there next to each other. The doorknob of the classroom suddenly rattled. They sprang apart and jumped up, scrambling to their feet quickly and staring at the door. After over 1 minute of complete silence, in which nothing happened, Draco felt his heart start back up. He reached again for her where she stood a few feet away, but Hermione shook her head slightly. "It's late.
I should get back to Gryffindor Tower. Everyone's celebrating the end of exams, and besides, I'm sure Harry is rather upset about the things he heard tonight," Hermione said.
"I'm pretty sure between the cinnamon rum and Ginny Weasley he'll be all right," she laughed. But he nodded and continued that prophecy was rather grim. "But Hermione, you should know that prophecies are not always real or accurate, and besides, Dumbledore said that Voldemort never heard the whole thing."
"Yes," she said uncertainly. "That all was rather odd."
"No more odd than your father being a Death Eater,"
Draco said in amusement. She smiled sadly. "I still don't understand how he got himself in that situation. Well, I know you mentioned the tattoo, but then how did he know to contact the Order? Or did they reach out to him? And why was Professor Lupin calling Dad a mouse?"
Draco shrugged his shoulders and drew her in close. "I'll miss you this summer."
She buried her face into his chest, sniffing his cologne deeply. "What do you mean? Aren't our fathers getting together to sign our betrothal contract or some such nonsense?" She laughed, and after a moment Draco did too. But there was a not-so-small part of him that didn't think it was such a crazy idea. Hermione decided to leave first so that they wouldn't be caught together in the entrance hall. Draco followed suit a minute later, turning the classroom door handle carefully to steek the door without a sound. He moved stealthily across the entrance hall to the dungeon staircase and set off nimbly down the corridor. Just as he was about to reach the entrance to the Slytherin common room, a grin of accomplishment from getting away with their tryst scot-free blooming on his face, a voice spoke up in the darkness behind him. "Mr. Malfoy, so good of you and Miss Granger to perform such a thorough inspection of the divination classroom this evening as part of your prefect duties. One would have thought that the discussion in the headmaster's office, not to mention a party in the common room, would be enough to dissuade you from any additional extracurricular endeavors." Professor Snape stepped out of the shadows behind him.
Yes, sorry, Professor. Indeed."
The man stepped closer.
"An enlightening evening, no doubt?"
"You could certainly say that," Draco agreed. He hesitated. He had questions for Snape, but wasn't sure if now was the time.
"Professor, may I ask you something?" "You may." "My father, he told me once that years ago you supported him. You know who?" Snape only nodded. "But you switched your allegiance." "I did." "What made you change your mind?" Snape was silent for a long moment. Then he answered, "That is between myself and Professor Dumbledore. However, you can be assured that you and I are not so different, Draco." And with that, Snape swept up the dungeon corridor towards his offices and private rooms. What the hell did that even mean? Wondered Draco. Snape was always acting so mysteriously. With a resigned grimace, Draco turned and walked the last few steps to the entrance of the Slytherin common room. He kicked aside a trail of party cups on his way to the dormitory stairs. One thing was clear. The party was over, and the trouble was only just beginning. Chapter 23. Invitation and Infiltration. Summer 1995. The Grangers were indeed coming to Malfoy Manor that summer, but not for betrothal contract negotiations, much to Draco's immense relief and simultaneous slight and unreasonable disappointment. There was to be a reception to welcome back old friends and family, Narcissa told him in clipped tones when she met him at the platform in King's Cross. "Where's father?" Draco asked stiffly. He had a feeling that this reception was not going to be a joyous occasion. "Convalescing," she answered, equally taciturn. "From?" he asked sharply. "We'll discuss it at home," she replied with a meaningful look at him. She turned and came face to face with Linda and Hermione. "Ah, Linda! Hermione! So good to see you both," his mother said, and she looked to be telling the truth. In fact, she almost looked relieved that the two of them had approached at all. "Narcissa?" Hermione's mother said, tilting her head in curiosity, as though trying to puzzle out something. "It's good to see you too. It's been a little while since I've heard from you." "Yes, well, it's been a bit busy as of late. I've had family obligations." Replied Linda, furrowing her brow. "I understand. I've been dealing with family issues myself." Hermione looked up sharply at her mother. Draco took a chance and spoke up. "Miss Granger, is your husband with you? I hope he's not feeling ill." His stomach was in knots. As long as Draco had known Lucius, he'd never been sick a day in his life. Even when Draco had been 7, and Lucius had fallen off his broomstick from 30 feet in the air, demonstrating the Pemberton turn, he'd taken only an hour or so to recover, at least well enough to talk. If his own father was convalescing, Draco was highly concerned about how Hermione's Muggle father had handled any punishment doled out by the Dark Lord. "Richard had to work. Emergency dental situation. Couldn't be helped, I'm afraid. But we'll all see each other next week, I'm sure." "Next week?" asked Draco. "For the reception, of course. We wouldn't miss it." Hermione's eyes flew wide, accompanied by Narcissa's and Draco's. "Oh," Narcissa faltered, "you're invited? I wasn't aware. We're only offering our home as the location for this reception. Another wizard is hosting it, I'm afraid." And now that Draco looked more properly at his mother, she did look quite afraid. Did Narcissa not realize that bringing Richard into this nonsense also meant bringing in Linda? Draco wondered. "Did you not want us to come?" Linda asked, looking a bit hurt. "Of course, I want you all to come. Yes, I'm always happy to spend time with you, Linda," Narcissa said earnestly. Linda smiled, but looked at Narcissa a bit sadly. Draco had a feeling that Linda was in the dark about her husband's clandestine activities, but perhaps she had an inkling that something was afoot. "Lovely. We're looking forward to it," Hermione's mother said. "We should get going. Draco, Narcissa, lovely to see you." His mother moved towards Hermione's mother quickly for a parting hug, and Linda appeared almost taken aback, returning the hug stiffly, before relaxing a bit. "Lovely to see you as well," Narcissa said warmly. Draco leaned towards Hermione and gave her a soft kiss on the cheek, nodding goodbye to Mrs. Granger. "See you next week," he said quietly to Hermione as their eyes met. "Ready, Mum?" Hermione asked, picking up Houdini's cage and her knapsack and placing them atop the trolley with her trunks. "Yes, let's go," Linda answered with a smile. As they headed towards the gate leading back to the Muggle world, Linda nodded to the nice red-haired woman, Mrs. Weasley, who had escorted her into platform 9 3/4 area. The woman smiled and waved, then turned back to the conversation that she was having with a brown-haired man dressed in a rather shabby jumper and trousers. Her companion looked up as the woman waved, catching the eye of Linda Granger, who did a slight double-take. This man looked familiar to her. Who was he? Hermione?" Linda turned a quick smile on her daughter. "That man over there? The one talking with the red-haired lady? Do you know him?" "That's Professor Lupin. He was our Defense Against the Dark Arts professor in 3rd year. He's sort of a guardian for my friend Harry Potter. Why?" "Oh, no reason, love. Just curious." But the feeling itched at her, like a rough tag inside of a blouse, digging into her psyche. Who was that man, and why did he look familiar? It wasn't until the following day, on her way out of the Sainsbury's, that she remembered. She'd actually seen the man twice before. The first time had been at a different grocery, several years earlier. She'd walked out of the shop and found Richard talking to that man next to the car. She'd approached them, expecting to be introduced. Each of them periodically ran into patients whilst doing errands, but by the time she got to the car, the man was gone. "One of your patients?" she'd asked. No, he just wanted directions," Richard had replied, and Linda didn't think twice about it. But then, about a year or so later, she decided to surprise Richard with a picnic lunch in the park. The weather was gorgeous, and both of their afternoon schedules had cleared unexpectedly. The practice's receptionist ordered sandwiches and lemonades from the shop round the corner, and Linda hurried to catch Richard at the park, where he sometimes jogged for a bit of exercise. She found him facing away from her, sitting on a park bench, in conversation with the very same man she'd seen at the shop. The two men weren't focused on each other, but rather having a conversation whilst facing forward, something she'd seen men do plenty of times. The other man had a little bag of greens that he was occasionally tossing to the ducks nearby. As she approached, the man caught sight of her and smiled. "I should be going. A pleasure speaking with you." He stood, and before Linda could say anything, walked away. "Who was that?" she'd asked. "Oh, just a nice man making conversation," Richard answered. "We were talking about the ducks. Did you know ducks have 3 eyelids? Turns out they can also see in colour." "Interesting," Linda said as she sat down. She looked around for the man, but he had disappeared almost instantly into the crowd. He seemed familiar. "The duck?" Richard had asked jokingly. "You got to watch out for these ducks, Lindy Hop. They're all guilty of foul play." She laughed. "No, silly goose. That man, the one you were talking to." Richard frowned. "Did he?" "Yes, it seems like last year. You were talking to him in the Tesco parking lot one day. He was lost and you gave him directions." "Huh, how about that? You know me. Remembering names and faces isn't my strong suit. I can never keep them straight. But you know, I hear a pelican." "Richard!" Linda laughed. "Quit quacking jokes and let's eat." They finished their sandwiches, sharing a bit of their lettuce with the closest ducks, and Linda purposefully put the familiar-looking man out of her thoughts, even though something about the interactions seemed odd. She had forgotten what it was, exactly, until today. The second time that Richard and the man met, when the man caught sight of her from several feet away, he seemed to instinctively know that she was coming to interrupt them. He knew that Linda and Richard were together. How? And now she found out he was a wizard all along. Had it all been a coincidence? Or had this wizard made contact with Richard years ago, knowing that Hermione was a witch the whole time? It chilled her, thinking her family might have been being watched for years before the wizarding world had made contact. Had they been under surveillance? Was there a secret network of wizards and witches watching Muggleborns before speaking with them? She thought back to another encounter with a member of the wizarding community that they had met. In this case, it had been one that she and Richard had set up. After their initial meeting with Professor McGonagall in their home, they had been rather curious, and a little spooked, if truth would be told, by the whole idea of magic.
They'd always felt that Hermione was special. If Linda killed a houseplant, Hermione took it to her room, and it bloomed again overnight. When Richard lost his watch at the beach once, when Hermione was 5, she told him that she'd get it back for him, and the next morning it was on the kitchen table, the crystal broken and full of sand, but returned all the same. When she was upset once, every window pane in her bedroom window cracked at the same time. And when Hermione was about 10, a young mum well across the park forgot to set the brake on her pram, and was unable to catch it as it barreled at a high rate of speed towards a busy street. Linda tried to shield Hermione from the sight, but her daughter fought to look around her shoulder. She held out a hand and said, "Stop!" in a firm voice. The pram rolled to a gentle stop, apropos of nothing, and then turned around and rolled back towards the racing mother. It wasn't normal, to be certain. But was this whole wizarding world all just some elaborate hoax? It did not seem like it, but it was always good to verify such things. Richard had called one of his old trusted military buddies, he'd said. That person put feelers out up his chain of command and got them in touch with someone in British military intelligence. A young woman who called herself Wix had stopped by, reassuring them that yes, in fact, there was a wizarding community in Britain, and yes, if they'd been visited by a member of the staff of Hogwarts, the daughter was a member of that community. The woman had been comforting, but had not shared many details with them. All would be explained, she said, at Hogwarts. The trouble was, Linda thought, she and Richard didn't go to Hogwarts. And whilst the time they spent with Professor McGonagall was highly interesting and enlightening, it had only scratched the surface of the questions they had. Well, this strange man had been following them for years, apparently, and her husband was meeting a wizarding couple in secret without her. It was time for answers, damn it. Even in her early 70s, Octavia Cavendish cut a formidable and imposing figure. Though she and Heathcliff were financially well off, she refused to fully retire. Instead, she maintained her seat on the board of trustees at the National Portrait Gallery, where she acted as a docent every other Wednesday afternoon. Her work as the Under-Secretary to the Department of Culture, Media and Sports for the British government was still the stuff of legend. It was because of her that much of the arts enjoyed by locals and tourists alike had been brought to London in the first place. For these reasons, she was highly respected in her circles within the government of England, such as they were. It was these contacts that Linda was counting on. Her mother might be a bit overbearing at times, but Linda always knew it came from a place of love, at least. "Mother, I was hoping that you could put out some discreet inquiries with some of your old contacts in the DCMS. I know it's not generally their purview, but I'd like to get in touch with a woman from military intelligence that I spoke with a few years ago about something." "Military intelligence? Why can't you go to Richard for this? Doesn't he have some military contacts years ago from when he played soldier?" Octavia asked. Linda sighed, gritting her teeth. "Richard was a medic, Mum, and yes, he still knows plenty of people in the service, but, well, it's something I want to try to get on my own. Nothing too terribly important, so I don't want to burn one of his favours to get in touch with her." Linda fibbed smoothly. "I see. Is there some kind of trouble between you and Richard?" Why does she even go to her twice-weekly jazzercise class? Linda thought to herself. With all the jumping to conclusions she does, surely she gets enough aerobic exercise. "Mother, if you don't think your contacts are able to help," Linda wheedled, knowing that belittling her mother's place of power was the only surefire way to spur the woman into action. No, I'm certain I can find her. What did you say her name was?"
I didn't, but she goes by Wix. The following morning, Linda was finishing up a cavity filling when Samantha came over the intercom. "Call for you, Dr. Granger." "Thanks, Samantha. You can put it through to my office." The thick Scottish accent that met her ears was instantly familiar. This was certainly the young woman that had come to see them. Linda recalled her vividly. She had had bright blue hair with a black streak near the front, about shoulder length. Her striking blue eyes were the same shade as her hair. She was quite recognizable, Linda thought. "Hello? Is this Hermione's mum?" Yes. Sorry to bother you. I didn't know if you would remember me," Linda began, flustered. "I had a few questions, and I didn't know if we could perhaps meet. Do you have any time this week?" "I can come right now, if you like." Sure, that would be great." There was a small cracking noise, and a swirl of brief wind, and without warning, a young woman stood before her. Linda's shock was immediately outstripped by her confusion. Was this the same girl? She looked similar, at least in the face, but gone was the blue hair and blue eyes, replaced by nearly greyish-brown hair, and a drab ponytail, and grey eyes. She looked almost sad. "Are you Wix?" Linda asked, befuddled, the phone slipping dead to the desk service. "Yes, Miss Granger. We met a few years ago," the woman said. "Yes, of course. You look different." Linda chuckled a bit. "My apologies. People don't just usually appear in my office that way." "Oh, I'm sorry about that. I know it can be a bit jarring for muggles." The woman smiled kindly. "As for my appearance, I'm a metamorph magus, so I can change my appearance at will, see?" The girl appeared to be focusing very hard, and suddenly her hair turned green and curly, and stretched down her back. "Wow, that's a skill I wouldn't mind having," Linda said, mouth agape. The woman smiled, but her hair went back to the sad mousy brown. "You wouldn't be the first person to say it. But I'm not here to talk about myself. What can I help you with?" Now that Linda had her here, she was a bit hesitant. What if she had been blowing all this out of proportion? Perhaps the man really had been lost all those years ago. Maybe he just looked like the man on the train platform. And there could have been any number of reasons why Richard had been meeting Narcissa that day. Perhaps Lucius's birthday was coming up and she wanted gift ideas. But it was just too many coincidences. "I'm hoping you can shed some light on a few odd incidents that have happened recently." The woman could not, or would not, tell her as much as she'd hoped. "Yes, sometimes it is the case that we watch the family of a Muggleborn for a bit before we make contact. There are times that we need to determine the difficulty that the witch or wizard might experience with the transition from a non-magical family to one that knows about magic." "So you think that might be what these meetings were? Do you think that the man was trying to gauge whether Richard would be receptive to the idea of magic?" "Perhaps," the woman said carefully. Linda nodded. "And the Malfoys, are they part of this? Were they, shall we say, assigned to us to make our transition easier?" Wix looked at her in confusion. I don't know anything about that. But earlier, you said that you and Narcissa Malfoy had become friends." "Oh, yes. She's quite nice. She seems... well, I don't mean to make presumptions, but she was very interested in Muggle ways. Lots of questions, you know." "Is she really?" Wix seemed highly intrigued by this. "Does she know many other Muggles or Muggleborns? Does she talk about them at all?" "No, not really. Although occasionally she has alluded to a time in her past, perhaps, that she had been in Muggle shops. I took her to a couple of shops. I remember her being surprised by some of the fashions that are currently out there. For instance, she mentioned that she thought she'd find trousers that flare out at the cuffs, or else vest with fringe, headbands, white boots, brightly coloured dresses and shirts. Things that might have been popular in the late 1960s and 70s.
That is interesting, Wicks said. Tell me, Linda, do you have an owl or a mobile phone?
Yes, I have a mobile.
I'm going to give you my number. If you don't mind, can you keep me apprised of anything unusual that happens, particularly with Narcissa?
Linda frowned.
Is Narcissa in some kind of trouble? No, not at all. It's just, well, if I'm being honest, Narcissa is my aunt. Funny enough, I've never met her. She and my mother had a falling out years ago, but recently I learned, I thought recently that perhaps she might be interested in a reconciliation. Just let me know if anything unusual happens, all right?
Linda's brow furrowed.
I'm not sure I like keeping secrets from her. I don't want Narcissa to think I'm spying on her. You're welcome to let her know. In fact, if she's interested in speaking with me, perhaps we can all meet.
Linda nodded slowly.
All right, I'll speak with her and let her know that Wicks is interested in meeting. That sounds great. 2 things, though. Don't mention me around anyone else. Hermione and Draco are probably okay, but no one else, and my real name is Nymphadora, but I usually go by Dora.
Oh, Nymphadora, what a beautiful name, Linda said.
I'm glad you think so,
said Nymphadora with a little smile. Chapter 24. Daughters and Dalliances. Early July, 1996. The gala reception was every bit the lavish affair that the Grangers had attended 5 years before. Hermione was looking forward to it for many reasons. One, of course, was that she would be attending with Draco. The fanciful part of her daydreamed about a Yule Ball do-over, in which the 2 of them could dress up and dance together, instead of dancing around each other with scowls and hurt looks on their faces. But she was also looking forward to seeing her father and Draco's father interact. She had been mulling over the entire situation for days, ever since the confrontation at the Ministry. Unfortunately, her father had not been very forthcoming about the whole debacle. He only said that she should play along with anything that Lucius or Voldemort said, for all their safety. He had insisted that he had everything in hand, and that she needn't worry herself. He only wanted her to stay safe. He would not go into details as to how he came to be a double agent for the Order. She worried for her father. He was only a dentist, and such a kind-hearted one at that. She remembered moments in their dental practice over the years when a particularly piteous young patient would cry in fear of whatever procedure was needed. Her own father often grew misty-eyed along with the youngster. Hermione couldn't picture him as a spy or a secret agent. He just didn't have that level of guile, she thought. Dad was always such an open book. Draco came through the flue at about 5 minutes until 6 o'clock. "Ready?" Draco asked grimly, after exchanging greetings with the 3 of them.
"Lead the way,"
Linda said, affixing a smile to her face. Hermione and her father watched the 2 of them disappear into the flue. Then he reached down lovingly for his daughter's hand,
patting it as he rested her fingers in the crook of his elbow.
"Chin up, crab cake. Listen. Don't speak, unless you absolutely must. Stay agreeable."
And with that, they followed Draco and Linda.
Sissy's brat stepped through the flue, with a Muggle woman on his arm. Salazar's nutsack, Bellatrix thought. She never thought she'd see the day that the Malfoys would welcome a Muggle into their manor. The woman was petite, with shoulder-length brown hair swept to one side. A necklace and earrings of rubies glittered at her throat. Her cream-coloured dress was decidedly Muggle, That is to say, it showed plenty of skin, a fact that was not lost on the wizards in attendance. Bellatrix watched in disgust as Roll sucked in his gut, and Crabbe surreptitiously wiped his teeth to remove the bits of spinach and chicken within them. Draining her glass of fire whiskey, Bellatrix ignored the fact that no wizards had reacted that way when she entered the room in her satin silver robes. Not that she cared, of course. There was only one wizard that she wished to impress, and his facial expression had not changed when the Muggle woman entered, except to lean forward in anticipation. Immediately behind them came the interloper, Richard, Voldemort's cousin, and the girl, Voldemort's daughter. But who was the girl's mother? Bellatrix recalled seeing a photo of Voldemort when he was young. He'd been quite a handsome young man, tall and thin, dark eyes, and he'd had the most luxuriously curly dark hair. Undoubtedly, he had likely had his pick of witches at one time. As Bellatrix stood across the room, casting a critical eye upon all three of them, her blood ran cold. The girl and the woman both had brown eyes. They stood about the same height and had the same build. Their hair was the same shade, although where the mother's was straight, the daughter's was curly. The same kind of curly that she had seen in a photograph of Voldemort when he was young.
Was it possible? Would the Dark Lord have dirtied himself, sullied his wizarding purity by being with this filthy Muggle woman? Still, Bellatrix could at least partly understand. It was clear that the Dark Lord was treating the interloper with kid gloves. It was almost as though this Richard fellow had something on the Dark Lord, something the man was threatening the wizard with. She would not doubt that, given the chance to woo the man's wife, the Dark Lord would take it. As much as Bellatrix hated to think of it, it seemed a high probability. Bellatrix did not know any Muggles, but she had to assume that their world was much like that of wizards. Mothers did not give up their children easily. It was entirely possible that whilst Richard had been away on a mission for the Dark Lord, this disgusting Muggle woman had taken it upon herself to cozy up to the Dark Lord. There was nothing to be done for it. She needed to keep this woman and this girl away from the Dark Lord. It was bad enough that the interloper, Richard, was trying to take her place at Voldemort's right hand. The only thing that Bellatrix had that Richard did not was her good looks, and even that had always been questionable in the eyes of the Dark Lord. Voldemort had never responded to her advances, despite Bellatrix's obvious interest in him. But, apparently, he'd been interested enough in this woman to make a move on her. Bellatrix began to step forward, but found that she was not alone. At the same moment, both Lucius and Narcissa moved towards the small group.
"Lord and Lady Granger, so lovely to see you again!" Narcissa sparkled. Bellatrix turned and cast her a withering glare. Lord and Lady? Who the hell did Narcissa think she was fooling? These commoners were no more Lord and Lady than that insulting kitchen elf. "Narcissa, a pleasure to see you," the woman said warmly, and Bellatrix was incensed to see the two women exchange air kisses. Her own sister, greeting a Muggle as an equal. Lucius bowed low to the interloper. "Granger, so good to have you here," he murmured sycophantically. Richard nodded back and stuck out a hand. Lucius took it awkwardly. As the Muggle couple turned and greeted the other half of the Malfoys, Bellatrix noticed that Richard and Narcissa seemed to have a bit of a moment, wordlessly. The two of them exchanged meaningful glances. What was this, then? Bellatrix knew better than to think that Sissy would take up with another man. What were the two of them playing at?
but it did not matter. Lucius was turning as though to introduce the Muggle woman to their colleagues, including the Dark Lord. This would not do. "Sissy, perhaps our guests would enjoy a tour of our library," Bellatrix suggested. Lucius looked incensed. He had been about to present the girl to Voldemort, and he also had told Bellatrix more than once to stop referring to Malfoy Manor as her own. Bellatrix smiled snidely at him. "That sounds lovely, actually," said Richard, with a glance at his daughter's barely contained excitement.
"Richard, perhaps you'll stay with us whilst the others explore the library?"
Lucius asked pointedly. Richard was his protection, because the man was not only a secret agent but also a family member of the Dark Lord. Richard had not been punished the way he, Bellatrix, and Dolohov had been after the failed mission in the Ministry. If Lucius could keep Richard on his good side, perhaps Lord Voldemort would be benevolent towards him. Richard reluctantly turned back to the men. "Of course." Hermione was enamored from the moment the group entered the library, just as Narcissa expected she might, based upon Draco's stories of her at school. Linda looked around, impressed by the grandeur of the place. "This is lovely, Narcissa." "Yes, Sissy always was bookish growing up. Father used to bring her a new book every time he went away for work." Bellatrix eyed Linda mistrustfully. "Oh, I hadn't realized. Are you sisters?" Linda asked in surprise. They had, of course, spoken on the way to the library, the three women. Pleasantries. "How are you? What a lovely dress. Your necklace is beautiful." The usual niceties that women were wont to exchange. Bellatrix had not participated much, only nodding her thanks when the compliments were given to her. But it did not escape her notice that Narcissa had not followed up her introduction. "Linda, this is Bellatrix," with the next part, "my sister." A part of Narcissa's heart ached to think of Bellatrix for very long, or very deeply. For many years, Bellatrix had not been a good part of her life. She had been in Azkaban, and before that she had followed the Dark Lord off of the cliff of normalcy. The Bellatrix that Narcissa had known as a child was at best precocious, at worst sinister. Best kept at arm's length, to be sure. But as they had grown, Bellatrix had either gotten better at masking her diabolical side, or she had outgrown it. Narcissa could never be certain. However, she recalled the years at Hogwarts as some of the better ones in her sister's shadow. It was true they were several years apart. Bellatrix was beginning her 5th year when Narcissa was sorted into Slytherin House. But Narcissa remembered the feeling of pride that she had watching her older sister navigate life as an upperclassman. All of that went away the year after Bellatrix finished school and joined the Dark Lord's movement. She returned at holidays, spreading Voldemort's message, a message that Narcissa's longtime beau, Lucius, took to like a Grindylow to a swimmer. Before he had even graduated, Lucius was angling for invitations to meetings with the Dark Lord. And then Lucius was lost to her, just like Bellatrix had been. Even the night of their wedding, her new husband, her wizard, had disapparated away to answer Voldemort's call. "Yes, Bellatrix and I are sisters," Narcissa said, with forced gaiety. "How nice. I've always longed for a sister. I had a brother, but he was older than me. We were close when we were young, but he moved to America several years ago. I've only seen him a few times since Hermione was a baby." "Pity," Bellatrix said brusquely. "So, Linda, Lucius tells me your daughter was an orphan. Did you know her father well?"
Linda looked uncomfortable.
"Yes, we met a few times." "What was he like?" Sorry? The father of your daughter. What was he like? Oh, very nice, I suppose. To be honest, we didn't speak much. He was rather busy, you see. Well, that was to be expected, of course. He had a very high-ranking job. Narcissa could tell that her friend was uncomfortable with the line of questioning. Well, none of that really matters. Hermione is a lovely girl, all her own right. Thank you, Narcissa. That's very kind of you to say. We're quite proud of our little Hermione. Bellatrix fixed her sister with a glare. And you, Bellatrix, you have children, do you not? Linda asked in confusion. At these words, Bellatrix grew incensed and stormed out of the library, slamming the door magically behind her. Did I say something wrong? Does she not have a child? Children are rather a sore point for Bellatrix. Why do you think she has a child? Linda looked around carefully. The teenagers were further in the stacks, and appeared that Bellatrix was gone for now. I'm so sorry. I didn't think of it. When I realized you two were sisters, I only assumed. Oh, that was foolish of me. Of course you can have more than one sister. It was Narcissa's turn for confusion. What do you mean? I've been in contact this week with a relation of yours. I'm not sure if you know of her. Her name is Nymphadora. Hermione grabbed him by the hand seconds after they entered the room, and pulled him down the centre aisle of the library. The Malfoy library was more compact than the library at Hogwarts, of course, but what it lacked in space, it more than made up for in content. It stretched 3 stories high, the upper balconies reachable by 2 small spiral staircases at opposite corners of the space. The white walls were adorned with gilt filigree, which glowed under the magical sconces and chandeliers spaced throughout. At the back wall of each level stood an enchanted fireplace, wreathed by plush green and gold armchairs and sofas. The space was warm and inviting, and Draco could tell that if Hermione wasn't convinced that he was the right wizard for her before, she was certainly convinced now. "This is beautiful," she said, spinning around dizzyingly after sprinting up the nearest staircase for the next floor. He watched her, eyes alight in wonder, soft curls gathered against their will in a straining clip at the nape of her neck. Her dress of blue teal seemed to swirl around her like water, setting off the early summer glow of her skin. She was right. The sight was beautiful. "So are you," he said, so quietly that she could not hear, his eyes never leaving her. "How many books do you suppose?" "I've never counted. 500,000. 500,000, do you think?
Possibly." He smiled, swinging her around to face him. "Are you only after me for my books, Granger?" He put his arms around her waist, pulling her close.
"I'll admit it does sweeten the pot a bit," she chuckled, putting her hands on his shoulders. He tilted his head, leaning down to kiss her softly. He loved the feel of her in his arms, the smoothness of her skin, the sprinkle of freckles on her shoulders. He kissed her lips, then her neck, as she tilted her head up and back to allow him room to work his magic. After a moment, he smiled against her skin. "I can tell you're trying to read titles over my head." She laughed, caught. "I can move if it lets you see better," he continued flirtatiously, kissing a spot at her collarbone that made her giggle. "No, our mothers are downstairs."
"The Dark Lord is in the drawing room, but what shall we do? Just not live our lives?"
She gasped suddenly. "Oh my goodness! He is, isn't he? I didn't even think."
"It's all right. He isn't going to bother us. Your father and my father are here. It's just a reception, just dinner, a bit of dancing. Nothing to be concerned about."
"I hope you're right." Her copper eyes stared into his silver ones. "For all our sake."
Richard eyed Voldemort carefully, trying to size up his mood. He could tell that Lucius and several of the other men looked quite nervous, which was not usually a good sign. Had there been words already? "May I offer you a drink?" Lucius asked, gesturing to the fully stocked bar in the corner. An elf stood behind it, looking eagerly at Richard for his order. "Just a soda water, with lime, thanks," Richard said to the elf, who quickly began filling a crystal glass with ice.
"We were just discussing the conundrum of Hogwarts," Voldemort said. "There has been a deplorable lack of standards in the institution as of late."
Richard nodded, but said nothing.
"I feel that our youth must be taught properly, and I fear that Albus Dumbledore is spreading mistruths about my plans for the future. We must devise a remedy for this."
Richard and the others nodded thoughtfully. The woman called Bellatrix stomped back into the room. Richard eyed her carefully. She was certainly one to keep an eye on. A loose cannon with a short fuse.
"So, Richard," Voldemort said, "how is your daughter enjoying Hogwarts? I assume she is in Slytherin House."
Geez, no. She's a Gryffindor."
There was a collective intake of breath around the room. Voldemort looked long and hard at the man. "A Gryffindor?"
Lucius spoke up. "It is our belief that she is there to infiltrate Harry Potter's inner circle and make it easier for him to be defeated, my lord. It is my understanding that she confounded the Sorting Hat. She is quite powerful, you know. Well, that's no surprise, knowing who her father is."
Well, if anyone was able to infiltrate Potter's inner circle, it would be this man's daughter, Voldemort thought. After all, Richard had done the same to his circle. Still, to know that his cousin's daughter was in the school, working for him, it was strangely heartwarming. Particularly strange, considering that, to be honest, Voldemort was uncertain if he still had a heart. The whole Horcrux thing, followed by the restorative ceremony, had really created some strange outcomes, physically, for him. He found that he preferred to go barefoot now. Shoes felt restrictive, and now when he breathed, he seemed to be taking in a lot of air. More than once, whilst eating, a bit of soup had splashed up into his vertical nose holes. It was, to be frank, disturbing. He had considered a bandage so that no one would look at it, but he was afraid it would draw more attention to it. And when he tried a bandage, it had made his voice sound funny. Best ignore the whole flat nose holes situation and pretend like it was on purpose. The conversation had continued around him, and Voldemort turned back to the group. They appeared to be waiting for him to speak. He cleared his throat. "I am pleased to know that I have her allegiance as well. And, Lucius, how is your son finding Hogwarts?" "He seems to be finding it quite, enjoyable. At least, from what I can tell, my lord," piped up Bellatrix. "He's quite good friends with young Hermione."
A few of the men leered at each other knowingly. Voldemort shuddered imperceptibly. He thought back to his own years at Hogwarts. The girls had followed him around, much the same as they likely followed young Draco. He had found it off-putting and confusing. Voldemort could never truly understand boys liking girls and vice versa. He himself had never had a romantic interest in anyone. The one time that Bellatrix had managed to corner him alone had been so highly disturbing that even now the thought of it made him feel ill. Flashback. Christmas, 1978. She had pulled him away from the holiday party, offering some sort of special treat just for him. They entered a different room in Malfoy Manor, and she led him to the middle of the room. Bellatrix pulled off her long, heavy skirt, revealing a much shorter, sparkling skirt underneath. She snapped her fingers, and as if from nowhere, music began to play. "This is the Argentine tango," she cooed. "It's the most sensual dance on earth. I have dreamed of dancing this dance with you for all of my days. I long to feel your arms around me as we step to the music." Voldemort was frozen with confusion. He had never seen a girl or a woman in such a short skirt, even in photographs.
"I am not so sure,"
he began, but Bellatrix shushed him by putting a finger to his lips. He pulled his lips inwards between his teeth so as not to touch her finger. What had she been touching before she came in here? He could not be certain that her fingers were clean. And then, in a most disgusting turn of events, she took his hand and placed one finger on her own lips, and, horror of horrors, stuck out her tongue and licked his finger. Her tongue had been wet and sticky. He tried and failed to keep the look of disgust off of his face as he removed his hand from her grasp and wiped it on his robes. Bellatrix frowned at him, pressing her finger more insistently against his lips, even as he slapped her hand away. "You're so adorable when you play hard to get," Bellatrix trilled in giggling laughter. "Come, my lord, let us dance. Let us make music together."
I do not wish it. I know not how to dance,"
he finally said, feeling ashamed at having to admit this failure in his knowledge. Bellatrix had said not to worry. She knew a spell. When the spell took effect, Voldemort spent most of the next few minutes staring in fascination at his own dancing feet, which moved with a fluidity and grace that he had never known existed within his body. All the while, Bellatrix pressed against him in the steps of the dance, praising his perfect moves. The whole thing had astounded him. He had never done this before. He had always assumed that the sole purpose of his feet had been for walking. Now, this late in life, he was finding out that his body was born to serve the music within it. But then she came closer, closer, and now, instead of her finger hovering over his lips, it was her own lips. She had been spinning in his arms, and he was a maestro of motion, moving with the mellifluous melody. "Dip me!" she called to him in a chorus of encouragement. Emboldened by her confidence in him, he quickly surmised what it meant to dip your partner. He leaned over her, far over, so that her dark curls swept the ground under them. And then she leaned up towards him, lips puckered and eyes closing, reaching to put her lips on his. Why would anyone want this? He thought, in retching disgust. Before he could think properly, He had dropped her to the ground, ignoring her cries of pain and anger. "What was that for?" she bellowed at him.
"Enough! We are done here!"
he thundered at her. And now, unencumbered by her weight and her inability to keep up with his perfection, he danced solo, the spell unwinding in his limbs to create poetry in motion. He stepped, turned, stepped, kicked, stepped, sashayed, and then stepped right out of the door. The echoes of her lonely wails ricocheted down the corridor to him, even over the sounds of the rhythmic tap-touch-tap of his own feet. He looked down sadly.
"Finite incantatum,"
he said to his feet, which stopped dancing immediately, never to trip the light fantastic with such ease again. He hurried back to the Malfoy ballroom, where grating holiday orchestral music spilled out into the grounds. He'd rather listen to this awful tripe without moving at all than be stuck in a room alone with Bellatrix any more. Many moments after that evening, he wished to be able to rumba or merengue or foxtrot the way he had that night. But if the price he had to pay was being forced to touch his lips to Bellatrix's, no, thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. If you enjoyed this and would like to listen to more, please subscribe to me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts at Silver and Copper, or search Great 78 on Archive of Our Own.